Welcome into the Action Network podcast presented by FanDuel. I'm your host, Brendan Glasheen, joined by Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward. In this episode, we're breaking down UFC on ABC this weekend from the VyStar Veterans Memorial Arena in Jacksonville, Florida. 5 fights on the main card, 9 prelims. We dive into everything on the pod. We look at underdogs, props, and more. We finish with best bets. We'll start with the main event, of course. Looking at the fight, Zerillo, as I normally ask you, how would you like to bet first an analysis of the fight, and then how would you like to bet it, please?
Yeah, really good fight between Ilia Topuria and Josh Emmett. Should mention off the bat, I might be a little biased, but there's 3 or 4 guys in the UFC, 3 or 4 male fighters in the UFC who I think pretty confidently will fight for a belt one day and also wear a UFC belt one day. Ilia Topuria is one of them. The other 3, Khamzat Chimaev, Bo Nickal, and Shavkat Rakhmonov. Unfortunately, the latter 3 may end up having to fight each other at some point. So that's why I hedge a little bit by saying I'm pretty confident all of them will hold the belt one day. But the dynamic there was Shavkat, Bo Nickal, and Khamzat potentially all fighting maybe at middleweight at some point, I think makes that really interesting. But going back to this featherweight matchup, how I view Ilia Topuria. First off, he's 13 years younger than Josh Emmett. Emmett also was dealing with some injuries in that last fight against Yair Rodriguez, was finished via submission, which was a bit unexpected considering Yair tends to knock people out, showed some pretty slick submission skills, but he beat Emmett up. Emmett looked kind of slow, a bit aged. I mean, he is 39, and when you lose fractions of speed at the lower weight classes, as we've discussed before, weight classes honestly below 170, or even 170 and below, we've seen the data with regards to champions over the age of 35 and how they perform in title fights. And being 39 years old at featherweight is a detriment. So Topuria should be faster, should be more athletic. Josh Emmett hits extremely hard, and he tends to land on everybody. He has the most knockdowns in featherweight history. He has 11 knockdowns, and he's put people out cold. And Topuria has been wobbled in the past, gotten a firefight with Jai Herbert, wobbled by a head kick, nearly finished, ended up rallying in that fight. Topuria is the better fighter. He's more skilled. He has the grappling upside here, but Emmett hits extremely hard. We've seen Topuria get hurt in the past, and Emmett is the better wrestler. So he should be able to counter wrestle, keep things on the feet. I would expect at least early. But if this fight hits the mat, I think Topuria is actually going to finish him pretty quickly with a submission, which is why you see this underjuiced so aggressively. In terms of how I want to bet it, if I'm playing the Emmett side, Emmett by knockout plus 470, prefer to his money line. If he's going to be landing the type of shots he needs to land, I would expect him to be able to put Topuria out. Emmett round 1, 12-1, also interesting for the same reasons. His effectiveness should wane the longer the fight goes. He should carry that power, but I think his highest likelihood is finishing it in the first round. Concerning Topuria, did get wobbled in that Jai Herbert fight. He actually, though, has a pretty methodical approach and good process. He doesn't always rush in. You saw the way he handled Ryan Hall, taking him to the end of the first round before finishing him, the way he sort of dismantled, beat up, and then submitted Bryce Mitchell. He's pretty measured, and I don't expect him to look for the finish right away, especially in a 5-round fight. Never been in a 5-round fight before. Did show slight cardio concerns in his UFC debut where he came in on short notice. So going to be, I would say, relatively cautious early, but I would expect him to look for his openings and then eventually progress and finish Emmett. Topuria inside the distance, too juiced for my liking. I made it about minus 230. You could bet it at minus 250. Would not play that. I mentioned the Emmett props. The way I played Topuria, I think his first round prop is de-juiced, getting it at plus 150, wherever it is, it's too low. But Topuria round 2 plus 470, round 3, 10-1. I think those are better options, kind of with the way I see the pace playing out, him taking it cautious, feeling out the process for the first couple minutes, and then getting a bit more aggressive in his pursuit of Emmett. So Topuria round 2, round 3, sprinkling a little bit of both. And then I'll probably play his money line in parlays as well, bit Jen, but you know, the guys who I view as future champions, I'm going to find ways to bet them until they have that belt around their waist. The guys who I think are fraudulent, who may be viewed as title challengers, I'm going to find ways to fade them on their potential ascent up the rankings. So just another one of those, general MMA batting strategy type things I'm going to hold. If I think you're a champion, I'm going to keep betting you. I don't really care what the money line looks like. I'm not going to go and lay minus 350 straight on Topuria, but I'll probably have action tied to some, MLB favorites or other things that catch my eye on Saturday.
All right. Nice tease for the baseball content, which, by the way, you can catch these guys in the Action app with Billy Ward's got the Yerfie and Nerfie. I had to think about how to pronounce Yerfie, but because often people bet Nerfies. Anyway, Billy Ward's got his luck ratings up at actionnetwork.com. He breaks down the card and evaluates if the line is fair or he sees value elsewhere. So, Billy, with Zerillo's analysis in mind, what are you doing for Emmett and Topuria?
Yeah, I said in the luck ratings, I wouldn't be surprised if this one moved a little bit more towards Topuria since Monday, and it has like 20 or 30 cents, nothing crazy. I think we see that a lot with heavy money line favorites where just the sharp money kind of comes in late and pushes the side up a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I did want to correct Sean on something here. Josh Emmett is only 38. Let's give the man a break. He's not quite 39 yet. But the thesis of that is still very much true, that he's pretty old for the division, hasn't looked great lately, which isn't a good sign. Sean mentioned him having an injury coming into the last fight. Sometimes we use that as an excuse or expect a fighter to get better, but it was only 4 months ago. So if he had anything too serious, I don't think he's going to be 100% here. The only real angle I see, I'm not betting this one pre-fight, mostly agree with Sean's analysis. The only angle I see is perhaps Emmett live bet after 2 or 3 rounds. As we saw, Topuria has never been in a 5-round fight. His only fight that ever went to a decision was his UFC debut, and he did lose the 3rd round on all 3 judges' scorecards. It was short notice, so I'm not so much denigrating his cardio here, but sometimes guys like that, they don't really have a plan for when they don't finish you. He's finished 12 of his 13 fights. Everyone kind of folds when he hits them or submits them. What happens if that doesn't work? The power, as Sean pointed out, is still an issue in the later rounds, while it might not be quite there for Emmett. Can he land 1 or 2 shots in the 4th or 5th round against a tired Topuria? Probably. And obviously, with the live betting, we don't have to take the risk of Topuria just starching him right away. So if this one gets real ridiculous, Emmett plus 500, plus 1,000, whatever, after a couple bad rounds, I'll probably be going with that. But from a pre-fight side, if you weren't going to take Topuria at the lighter money line odds earlier in the week, you certainly wouldn't now.
Zerillo, you can take Emmett, the 38-year-old, and then Adam Wainwright in London at plus 110, the 41-year-old Adam Wainwright. And it's not a favorite, but you can go 2 old guys.
Maybe an adjusted over for that London series where we're going to get a bazillion runs. The 2 games that we played there a couple of years ago, I believe the average final score finished at about 20 runs combined. So maybe an adjusted total with the Topuria money line to bet against the old guys here on Saturday.
Yeah. Take the over on the runs in London, but you might want to lean under in the rounds. But it makes the juice on the under rounds in this fight not too bad if you take the over in the London series to make the odds.
It's like the dynamic of the fight, I think, is what's really interesting too, in terms of how I'm playing the round props. I know Dan Stupp, our MMA editor, he's playing the fight to start round 2, I believe, at minus 150. That's a bet I considered making. I think the slowest pace is going to come in the early feeling out process. And it's kind of up to Topuria to dictate. We've seen Emmett in these other 5-round fights with Calvin Kattar. He's kind of content to stay on the outside, play that range kickboxing match, land the more impactful shots in each round, and doesn't need to get knockouts to win. He gets knockdowns to secure rounds, or he lands the more impactful punches. But yeah, I think it's up to Topuria, the type of pace that we're going to see in this fight, which is why I'm hesitant to play the unders, the under 2.5, which is juiced up. I'd rather take long shot prop odds in this fight. There's a lot of bets here that are really juiced up. So Emmett knockout plus 470, Topuria round 2, round 3, plus 400, plus 1,000. I think those are the best approaches. It's a well-lined fight, but something that I think you could justify taking big plus money stabs at.
All right. Apologies for the folks that aren't baseball people. We meaning me to a degree. I mean, Zerillo started it, but we couldn't help ourselves.
It's my fault. Blame me.
All right. On to underdogs that we like on the card. 14 fights, as we mentioned, 5 on the main, 9 prelims. Zerillo, favorite dog. Is this a good card for underdogs, generally speaking?
Yeah, I love this card for underdogs, and I love this card for unders, finish props. I think this is going to be a violent card, and I think there's some good plus money opportunities on here. I'm actually going to get out 2 favorite underdogs in this card because my best bet is also an underdog, but these are the 2 other underdogs that I'm playing. The first being David Onama against Gabriel Santos. David Onama's last fight against Nate Landwehr. We talked about Nate Landwehr the last time I was on the pod for the pay-per-view. Onama basically knocked him out twice in the first 6 minutes, and then gassed himself out trying to finish. And that is a pretty common outcome when the finish doesn't occur. The guy who over pursues the finish, his cardio falls off of a cliff. We've seen decent cardio from Onama in other fights. I think he just fully cardio dumped there. And if that was a knockout, if the fight had just ended there, and some referees would have stopped it. We've seen Nate Landwehr in similar positions get stopped in the past. So if that had been a knockout, what is the line here against Gabriel Santos? It's certainly not plus 200. I think Onama hits harder. He's got a 4-inch reach advantage. Yes, Santos has the grappling upside, but that's baked into the line. He's the favorite because he has the grappling upside. If this stays on the feet for extended stretches, it's going to be extremely close. It's probably going to look like a pick'em fight. Happy to take Onama at 2-1, especially with the reach advantage. I think he's the better striker, and he certainly hits harder, prioritize damage. With the crowd there too, they're going to be cheering for Onama. So give me David Onama at 2-1. I think this would be closer to a pick'em had he won that fight against Landwehr. And then a similar story with Cledson Rodriguez going, second fight of the card against Tatsuro Taira. He did miss weight. Cledson also missed weight in his last fight, so keep that in mind. Cardio, 3rd round may not be the best in terms of lasting throughout the fight, but I think he's got the striking advantage here. I think he has a clear power advantage here against Tatsuro Taira. Taira is a master of the back take, and when he wins, it's going to look fairly dominant because he's just going to hold his opponents in one position or finish them basically for the entire fight. But if Rodriguez is able to escape out of that position, and we talked about a similar dynamic with Raul Rosas Jr. taking the back, right? Going into that fight. And is his opponent going to be able to escape that position? Well, he was, and Christian Rodriguez ended up dominating the fight. I think a very similar dynamic here. If Cledson is able to avoid the body triangle, I think he's going to be extremely competitive, if not dominate, especially on the feet. He's got a big power advantage. He reminds me kind of a young Douglas Silva de Andrade. It's all aggression and craziness and wild, explosive techniques, but that's the kind of stuff that is relatively friendly to judges. And again, I'm not sure if this is in Billy's luck ratings piece, so I'm curious to hear if it is, but had a split decision loss to CJ Vergara, was a live favorite at the end of the fight, was a live favorite throughout the fight. That split loss, if you flip it back to a win, what is the line here? Probably closer to a pick'em than 2-1. So Cledson Rodriguez at plus 225 against Tatsuro Taira. David Onama about plus 195. Both guys who I think have a grappling deficiency relative to their opponents, but extreme power upside and should have better optics on the feet.
You got thoughts there, Billy? I know Zerillo kind of mentioned those. I don't think you have those in your piece, but any quick thoughts?
No, didn't touch on those. One thing I do want to mention based on Sean's analysis, with Rodriguez missing weight, a lot of states where if you miss weight, that's just it. The first time you weigh in, that's your official weight. You pay your fine or the fight's canceled or whatever's going to happen happens. That is not the case in Florida. Florida, like some other places, allows you either a 1 or 2 hour window to go back and try to continue to cut weight, which I think that's a huge disadvantage for the fighter that has to do so, especially a fighter like Rodriguez who missed weight in his last fight and could be in danger of losing his job. He's probably going to really work to get that extra weight off. But that's really tough because his opponent is back there with his Pedialyte and his Gatorade and his pasta and whatever he's eating, while Rodriguez is still sitting in a sauna sweating out more for another hour or two. Which also plays in to my favorite underdog, which is Jack Jenkins. He's fighting Jamal Emmers. Emmers, another guy that missed weight, but chose to take the option of continuing to try to cut rather than forfeit the penalty right away. That was one I did cover, or I didn't cover it in my luck rankings. I made the tweet saying I thought we got some free CLV on Jack Jenkins. I could not have been more wrong. This one went the exact opposite direction, but I'm honestly surprised. Jack Jenkins, short little stocky featherweight from Australia, used to play rugby, great cardio, great output, huge shades of Alexander Volkanovski here. And he's fighting a tall, skinny guy in Emmers. Both have a good wrestling background, and Emmers has 100% takedown defense in the UFC, but he was fighting straight grapplers who just telegraphed their shots and made it obvious what they were trying to do. Jenkins has some of the best transitions I've ever seen between striking and grappling. When his opponent steps in with a shot, he changes levels, disguises it like a body punch, puts you on your back, does really good work controlling it. We've also got a huge cardio advantage there. Like, he just has tremendous output down the stretch of the fight. But the biggest thing is Emmers got his knee absolutely shredded by Pat Sabatini a couple fights ago. And he won his fight coming back from that after 18 months, but did not look like the same kind of athlete. Like, rather than being snappy and bouncing in and out of range, he's kind of pawing on stuff. He doesn't quite have that speed and that pop. And you just never know with a fighter like that. Is he ever going to recover? Is he ever going to get that athleticism back? Which makes it really tough for a guy like Jenkins, who's bouncing in and out, huge output, fast feet, moving all over the place, bigger cage too. So the injury factor, plus the fact that we have the weight miss and Emmers is probably back there, still trying to sweat while Jenkins is recovering. That's more than enough for me on Jenkins. I was happy to take him at plus 140 earlier in the week. Very excited at the plus 180 we can get now.
I just want to mention, I don't have action on this fight, but Jamal Emmers was my best bet in his last fight against Hussein Askabov. He won that fight as a plus 160 underdog. He is exactly the type of guy you bet as a plus 160 to plus 200 underdog, and exactly the type of guy you'd ever touch as a minus 200 favorite. There's plenty of guys like that in the UFC. Jamal Emmers got his knee shredded because he made a horrible fight IQ decision and went to the ground with a grappler who he was beating up on the feet. He consistently makes bad decisions in fights. You cannot lay minus 210 on Jamal Emmers. He will screw you when you do it. You bet him as an underdog, not as a favorite.
I'm glad you mentioned the fight IQ before we move on. Not only did he go to the ground with Pat Sabatini, a mistake in and of itself, but he was trying to ankle lock or foot lock Sabatini while Sabatini had a heel hook. So for any of my other grapplers out there, an ankle lock kind of hurts, but it's probably not going to like ruin your day or damage you that much. And a heel hook, if properly applied, can keep you out of action for 18 months. So that's just never a game. It's bringing a knife to a gunfight, which is what he tried to do with one of the best grapplers in the division. Paid for it and might never be the same fighter again. So I'm going to bet against him until I'm proven wrong about his athleticism.
No, I agree. I didn't think he looked like his previous, explosive self in that last fight. So yeah, probably on paper has the better skills here and you could justify the favoritism, but with the weight miss, etc., maybe Jenkins live bet, that's probably something I'm going to target Jenkins live after round one, especially after that weight miss.
And I know we're belaboring this one a bit long, but better skills so far. Jenkins, he's not that young. I think he's 30, but like Volkanovski, he was a professional rugby player into his 20s. So like his skills could and should still be improving. Obviously, we don't want to bet too hard on a guy getting better, but it's a safer bet for a guy who's, somewhat new to the sport.
Jack Jenkins just turned 30 in March. There you go. More analysis of Jenkins again in the written portion of our breakdown over at Action Network. Billy Ward's luck ratings for UFC down in Jacksonville. On to the fight of the night. You got Trevor Peek taking on Machine Gun Mariscal. That's the fight we're looking at for the fight of the night. It's a very tight line, Zerillo, right now. Looking at FanDuel right now. Yeah, it's basically a pick 'em. You got Peek at minus 114, Mariscal at minus 106. How do you want to bet this one?
Yeah, Trevor Peek fight week. Incredibly odd, but exciting fighter. Trevor Peek fights like he's in a movie about MMA. It's the best way I could describe it. He fights like you told an actor, you're going to be an MMA superstar. We're not going to give you any training. What do you think you should do? The running tomahawk fist. Incredible. Never seen that in an octagon before. And that unorthodox nature does make him difficult to prepare for. Now, Chepe, I think, is the better fighter. I think that's almost indisputable, actually, that he's the more skilled MMA fighter. Went 11-0 as an amateur. Has arguably the best strength of schedule I've ever seen for a guy coming in off the regional scene. I mean, he's faced 7 UFC veterans, has wins over multiple, but Gregor Gillespie, Bryce Mitchell, Pat Sabatini, Yusuf Zalal, Steve Garcia, Joe Anderson Brito, all legit UFC fighters, not like low level went, 0-3 and dumped from the UFC. All guys who have multiple wins, I believe, in the UFC. But he's moving up from 145, taking this fight on short notice against the guy in Trevor Peek, who is very much kill or be killed, but also has the hardware to back it. Peek hits harder, has more durability. Chepe either needs to play the outside kickboxing game and outpoint him over 15 minutes, or probably find a way to either club him, sub him, or grapple and submit him. Do not expect that from a fighter whose nickname is Machine Gun. Expect him to jump right into the fire, exchange, and I think somebody falls pretty quickly. So the under 1.5 super juiced up here at -175. I think you could justify it, given the pace that I expect to see, the short notice nature of Chepe coming in here, probably going to look for the kill early. And Trevor Peek, this is his first time, I believe, fighting in front of a crowd for the UFC. I think, he won on Contender Series. And then his last fight, I believe, was also in the Apex, was it not? So going to be looking for a kill as well. Both fights for Peek were in the Apex. So I think the crowd is going to force just an insane pace here. And given the lack of defense on Peek's side, the lack of care, it's so likely that this finishes unless, they both show zombie chins for 7.5 minutes, and that seems unlikely. So the fight to end inside the distance is super juiced, but I think if it occurs, it's going to occur early.
Billy, how do you want to bet this one? Are you into Trevor Peek?
I'm not betting Trevor Peek. Allegedly, and I heard this listening to or watching some tape on him, his pro debut, somebody said, do you want to go have a fight or whatever? And he was surprised to show up to an arena because he thought someone meant like in an alley somewhere, which tells you a lot about his fighting style. He's, oh, you mean like an actual fight with gloves, not just some guys. But and also 8 UFC fighters on Marsikal's record. He also fought Carl Deaton, who's 0-1 in the UFC. So, doesn't quite count, but 8 of his, I believe, 19 pro fights came against future or past UFC contenders, which is just ridiculous. But I'm actually playing it the other way. You can get Marsikal in round 3 or by decision at +410. I also like, some SGPs if you have that available and over low minutes to get him up to plus money. If I'm Marsikal's camp here, my whole plan is just wait out whatever craziness and running hammer fists we're going to see from Trevor Peek. Maybe try to stick him up against the fence, take him down, just kind of ride out that storm, because there's no way Trevor Peek can do that for 15 minutes. I was shocked that he did it for 5 minutes, getting the finish at the end of round 1 in his last fight. So, Marsikal's an aggressive fighter. He's coming in on short notice. But if he has any kind of preparation for this one, that should be the plan. Whether you actually execute that plan, whether the excitement gets to be too much for you is a different question. But the round 3 or decision line is +410, which is like prop squad style odds, which I'm really surprised by, because I do think Peek is probably the side early in this one with Marsikal coming late. And if you want it a little bit less juicy, take it round 2 and beyond at +175 or so via SGP. I like that as well.
Good card for underdogs. Good card for live betting as well. I mean, Marsikal, easy live bet after round 1, given how Peek fights. So Jack Jenkins, Jose Marsikal. I have like 6 live bet opportunities on this card. I think it's a really good card for live betting.
I hesitated on the live bet on this one just because it's happening at like 1 Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific time. So I don't want to, the main event, I go, okay, you guys should be watching by then, but this is starting pretty early.
Okay, good to keep in mind. Again, to follow we'll talk about this. We always talk about this, but follow these guys in the Action Network app, because if they're adding stuff live, that is when you want to be in the app, when you can see when picks are being made. On to the prop market, Zerillo. What do you like for this week?
A lot of finish props on this card for me as well. And probably my favorite amongst them is Randy Brown and Wellington Turman to end inside the distance. You could get that at -175. I projected it closer to -200. Turman moving down here from 185 pounds. He has a wonky chin. So does Randy Brown. Brown has a 6-inch reach advantage. And with Turman moving down from middleweight, Brown should have a pretty severe speed advantage as well. I like Randy Brown quite a bit as a fighter. I think Billy does too. He's just really fun to watch, smooth movements. But he puts himself in danger, too, with the way he exits the pocket, tends to rely on head movement as opposed to actually protecting himself. So he's capable of getting caught as he exits. But also Turman and Brown both are very slick submission grapplers as well. We've seen Turman getting beat up in the past, pulling a armbar off of his back against Misha Serkinov. Brown is able to club and sub people, lock in things. So there's a lot of ways this fight finishes. Both guys are pretty violent in terms of their style. Even though Brown's a bit more slick, I'd say he's the better point fighter of the two. But if he's connecting on Turman, I think he's going to wobble him and hurt him. I think it's less likely Turman clips him and knocks him out, but I could certainly see a submission from Turman. So a finish on either side seems extremely likely. Love the fight to end inside the distance here. And then I'm also going to target Randy Brown live after round one because Turman moving down in weight, going from 185 to 170 is a bit chubby at middleweight. You know, maybe 170 better suited for him, but regardless, he never had the best cardio at middleweight. And I don't think it's going to improve going down to welterweight. So fight to end inside the distance and also Randy Brown live after round one. Maybe I'll consider Brown inside the distance in some round robins as well.
Billy, what do you got for prop play UFC Jacksonville?
Real quick on Sean's, it always cracks me up when a guy goes down a weight class and they're like, oh, cool, I won't be outsized in this new weight class. Maybe I'll have a reach advantage. And then the UFC just gives them the biggest guy they can find at the lower weight class. Like, you might as well stay at middleweight if you're going to fight 6'11" Randy Brown. He's not really that tall, but you guys know what I'm saying. But yeah, this is one I'm looking at, and this is going to be awful on the pronunciation. I'm sorry. Mateusz Rebecki versus Loic Radzhabov. This is one that I wrote up.
Pretty good.
That was very good.
That's pretty good.
Now don't try it again. Just keep going.
Yeah, that was it. We're going nicknames from here on out. But yeah, I wrote up this fight at the Action Network. You can see more of the technical analysis there. I went into this one watching tape fully prepared to try to pick a side. And then I couldn't believe when I saw the under 2.5 was plus 150 or so. I think it's a little bit of sports books overfitting the model here because both of their UFC debuts ended in a decision, but it wasn't for lack of trying, right? Both these guys come out and they just swing for the fences. I don't think I saw a single jab between either of them. So if you know any boxers in your life and you want to watch this fight with them, it'll drive them crazy. They'll be so mad. And then both guys have really good wrestling. Rebecki has a lot better fight IQ and top game. Like, he's happy to settle into a good position. He did a lot of the Khabib thing where he lets you start to get back up and then pulls you back down. Radzhabov just goes for takedown after takedown and then tries to kill you while you're down there, which usually gives you a chance to get back up. Both of which I think is going to play out nicely for at least one, if not both of these guys to be extremely gassed. They were both able to get takedowns and use that as kind of a rest in their last fight. But if either of them defends the other one's takedown, somebody's cardio is going to crack real soon here. And just with how violent and how heavy they both throw, I think someone ends up getting wobbled, shoots for a takedown. If it's not there, gets finished. If it is there, I expect Rebecki to be able to get back up and keep putting the pace on him, or Radzhabov to finish him on the ground with his aggression there. So I like the Rebecki side a little bit, but not nearly as much as the unders. As Sean's pointed out, just a great week for fights to end inside the distance, underdogs, stuff like that.
Rebecki live after round one. Radzhabov missed weight. I already thought Rebecki had slightly better cardio, and with the weight miss for Radzhabov, certainly going to look for Rebecki live after round one. So that's, I believe, live bet number 5 for me. I'll give out my other 2 when we get to best bets. It's a great card for live betting.
I'm not
there. Oh, go ahead, Billy. Sorry.
I'm not confident Rebecki has better cardio, and I'd bet on him to win in a marathon against Radzhabov, like a running marathon. But his fight IQ and the way he sticks you up against the fence and uses that as a rest when he's tired is just so much higher than Radzhabov, who even when dead tired is just swinging for the fences and trying to finish. And I don't care how good a shape you're in, you can only do that for so long. And I just love the Khabib move of let you get most of the way up and suck you back down while I'm resting from Rebecki. So he's definitely, I think he will win the cardio war. I don't necessarily think that's because he's in better shape, but it doesn't really matter when we're betting on it. If he's fresher, he's fresher.
I'm a big fan of Matt Returns in MMA.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Zerillo, we have arrived at best bets, final bets. They're all best bets in our eyes. But which one to you stands out right now before the card goes live?
Yeah, Cedric Dumas plus 155. It is my favorite bet. I didn't necessarily increase my stake on it or anything because I think he's going to be a phenomenal bet live after round one. I actually think he's the best live bet on this card, on a card full of great live bets. My final live bet, by the way, Brendan Allen live after round one in his fight against Bruno Silva. Just want to throw that out there because I've given out the rest of them. But Cedric Dumas against Cody Brundage, similar matchup in terms of stylistically to what Dumas faced in his UFC debut against Josh Fremd, except for the fact that Fremd actually has decent cardio and Cody Brundage falls off a cliff after 3 to 5 minutes. Dumas also has a 7-inch reach advantage here. I think he's more skilled everywhere aside from pure wrestling. And Brundage doesn't really do a ton with his wrestling other than sort of hold people down. So if he's able to stay safe, survive any submission attempt from Brundage, avoid getting clipped early, I think Dumas takes over here in the second and third rounds at a significant clip. So live after round one, think a great bet. You might get a better line than you will get pre-fight, but Brundage is literally going to collapse if Dumas is still alive after 5 minutes. I think it's very likely Dumas finishes him. Dumas by KO, plus 310 interests me. He's got a really good guillotine, though. So I could see Brundage getting tired, shooting a sloppy takedown attempt, and putting his head right into a choke. So would not go heavy on the knockout prop. If you play that, would include that in a round robin. Just take Dumas by money line straight up, plus 155, and then live after round 1.
Billy, your final bet or best bet or a bet that you're going to make and watch too. I always like that analysis or thought.
This is a tough one. So many of the bets that I really, really like fit into other categories. So I was kind of struggling here. Definitely going to watch this one just because I love both fighters. But Amanda Hebus by decision at plus 105. I think, is this the co-main event or is the one right before? But
Co-main.
One of those. Co-main. Two of the better grapplers in the female division. You know, Hebus is a double black belt in judo and jiu-jitsu. I think judo is the most underrated skill set for mixed martial arts because unlike jiu-jitsu, where you spend time playing off your back, judo is all about getting on top, all about holding top position, which is great for winning minutes, right? So I think she's going to have the ability to take Barber down here. She'll probably get clipped a little bit on the way in. And the money line has gotten way too far here on a fighter in Hebus who doesn't really finish anyone, and Barber doesn't really get finished. You know, she made it through with a torn ACL against Macy Barber, made it all 15 minutes. So this is one of those where if you think Hebus is going to win, you might as well, at the very least, take the round 3 or decision at slight juice or the decision specifically at plus money. Because if she wins this one, I don't see her just starching Barber early. And, you know, the money line is pretty heavy now.
I actually kind of like Rivas by sub. And I bet the fight to end inside the distance as well. We've seen Rivas get clipped in the past. Barber fights absolutely insane, especially in the second or third round. She really picks up her pace. So I could see her getting sort of aggressive, you know, attritional base stoppage, maybe late, but I think Rivas very live for a submission here. Barber gets taken down 3-4 times in every fight she faces a grappler. So I think Rivas is going to have, as you said, position on top, but I think she's going to have opportunities to finish as well. So maybe a submission or decision line. I think a knockout's fairly unlikely, but submission or decision could be a good way to play her. But in a round robin, I'll probably have Rivas by submission plus 500.
I could see that. The one thing that kept me back from that is since her split decision loss to Chukagian, she just came out and said, like, she wants to win minutes. She's realized that that's a part of the game. And Barber's just a competent enough grappler that unless she's totally gassed in the third round, which, you know, if you play the 3 or decision line or, you know, over certain minutes SGPs, there's other ways to include both of those if you agree with Zerillo's analysis.
All righty. Folks, remember, this card starts in the morning on Saturday at 11:30 a.m. So when Zerillo puts Wainwright and Emmett, and he makes that bet that I suggested early, I'm joking, be up and at it because, well, he didn't say no, so maybe he will. So 11:30 start for the prelims. Main card starts at 3:00 on ABC. ESPN ABC is your coverage for UFC Jacksonville. And all joking aside, you can find coverage from these guys as well on the baseball front. London series, Nerfy for the weekend, and also any games going on tomorrow after the London game at 1:00. So for Sean Zerillo, Billy Ward, Brendan Glasheen, thanks for tuning in, everybody, to the UFC betting preview here on the Action Network podcast presented by FanDuel. You all have a tremendous weekend. Enjoy the card, and we will talk to you again next week.